Have you ever wondered what it would be like to stand on the edge of eternity? To witness a moment so profound that it tears the very fabric between our world and the divine? This is precisely what happened on a high mountain, in an event we call the transfiguration. Why did Jesus meet with Moses and Elijah, two figures separated by centuries, on that glorious peak? This was not a dream, nor a simple metaphor. It was a real historical event that unveiled a truth so powerful it would redefine everything for those who witnessed it. And for us today, we are about to journey up that mountain to understand not just what happened, but why it remains one of the most pivotal moments in all of sacred history. The encounter on the Mount of Transfiguration was a divine act of tearing the veil. In the ancient world, the veil was a powerful symbol, particularly the one in the temple that separated the Holy of Holies, the very presence of God, from the rest of the world. Only the high priest could pass through it, and only once a year. But on that mountain, for a few precious moments, Jesus pulled back a far more profound veil, the one separating the temporal from the eternal, the seen from the unseen. This was not a vision playing out in the minds of the disciples. It was a physical manifestation, a moment where the full, unfiltered glory of the Son of God broke through his humanity. The light that shone from him was not reflected light, like the moon reflects the sun. It was the source, the very light of creation, emanating from within. This event wasn't just a miracle for the disciples to observe. It was a declaration to the cosmos. It was a signal that the course of sacred history was reaching its climax, that the reality of heaven was invading the reality of earth in a way it never had before. At the heart of this divine revelation was the presence of two monumental figures, Moses and Elijah. Their appearance was no coincidence, no random summoning of heroes from Israel's past. They were there as official representatives, as cosmic witnesses. Moses represented the law, the Torah, the very foundation of God's covenant with his people. He was the one who climbed Sinai, spoke with God in the cloud, and brought down the commandments that would shape a nation. Elijah, in turn, represented the prophets. He was the fiery, passionate voice who called Israel back to true worship, who confronted corrupt kings, and whose ministry was marked by the power of God's direct intervention. Together, they embodied the entirety of the Old Testament scriptures, the law and the prophets. Their presence with Jesus on the mountain was a living testimony, a divine endorsement. It symbolized the fulfillment of all the ancient covenants and promises. The law had prepared the way, and the prophets had pointed the way. Now standing between them was the way himself. And then, just as powerfully as they appeared, they began to depart. As they faded, only Jesus remained. And it was in that moment that the voice of God the Father thundered from a cloud, declaring, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." The message was unmistakable. The era of the law and the prophets had reached its culmination. Their purpose was complete, and now all authority, all attention must be directed to the Son. But this moment of glory did not happen in an instant. It was preceded by a journey, a silent ascent to the mountain's peak. Jesus invited only 3 of his disciples, Peter, James, and John. He led them away from the crowds, away from the noise and the demands of ministry, and began an arduous climb. The scriptures don't describe their conversation on the way up, and one can imagine there was little of it. As they ascended, the world they knew seemed to recede below them. The sounds of the villages faded, the air grew thinner, and the silence became more dense, more profound. It was a silence that was not empty, but full of anticipation. It was as if they were walking through an invisible barrier, crossing a sacred threshold that separated the mundane from the holy. Each step upward was a step deeper into a mystery they could not yet comprehend. This was not just a physical hike. It was a spiritual pilgrimage, a deliberate preparation of the heart and mind for a revelation that would shatter their understanding of the man they had been following. The choice of these 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, was an act of preparation, not favoritism. While Jesus loved all his disciples, he knew that these 3 formed an inner circle, each with a unique capacity and a specific role to play in the future of the church. He saw in Peter, the impulsive and passionate one, a rock upon which he would build. He saw in James, the firm and thoughtful one, a pillar of strength who would be the first of the apostles to be martyred for his faith. And he saw in John, the one described as having a tender heart but also a son of thunder, a capacity for deep spiritual insight that would lead him to write of the Word made flesh. They were not chosen because they were better, but because they were being prepared for a unique burden of witness. God often chooses specific people for specific revelations, not to elevate them above others, but to equip them for a task. We see this with Jeremiah, to whom God said, "Before I formed you in the womb I knew you, before you were born I set you apart." In the same way, these three were being set apart for a revelation they could not immediately share or even fully explain. They were being entrusted with a glimpse of glory that would have to sustain them through the darkness of the cross that was to come. As they continued their climb, a palpable pressure began to build, both in the atmosphere around them and within their own spirits. It was a spiritual pressure, a weightiness in the air that was more than just a change in altitude. One can only imagine a wordless whisper in their souls, an intuition that they were approaching something of immense significance. The mountain path itself seemed to narrow, the world shrinking until there was only the trail before them and the sky above. The air grew colder, sharper, and the very color of the sky began to shift as the day drew on, taking on hues they had never seen before. This was not just a sunset, it was a sign, a heavenly indication that they were about to witness a glory that was not of this world. The anticipation was a silent hum, a tension that promised to break into a symphony of divine light. They were on the verge of seeing their teacher, their friend, as they had never seen him before, and the entire creation around them seemed to be holding its breath in anticipation of the moment the Son of God would be revealed. And then it happened. Suddenly, without warning, the form of Jesus began to change before their very eyes. It was not a subtle shift, but a radical transformation. His posture, once that of a weary traveler, became light, ethereal. His face began to shine with an intensity that outshone the sun, and his ordinary clothes became a brilliant, dazzling white, whiter than any earthly process could make them. This was the light of eternity bursting forth. For a moment, his humanity became a transparent vessel for his divinity. The disciples saw him not just as the teacher from Nazareth, but as the eternal Son of God, unveiled and resplendent. The sheer power and holiness of the sight was overwhelming. Instinctively, they fell back, shielding their eyes, their hearts pounding with a mixture of terror and awe. They dropped to their knees, not as a conscious act of worship, but as an involuntary response of a mortal body in the presence of unveiled divinity. They had walked with him, eaten with him, and listened to his teachings, but in that moment, they truly saw him for the first time. This was the Shekinah glory, the very presence of God, which had once filled the temple, now radiating from the person of his Son. And as if this were not enough to shatter their understanding of reality, two other figures appeared with him. They did not walk out from behind the rocks or ascend the path after them. They simply were there, standing in conversation with Jesus, bathed in the same celestial light. And somehow, in a way that defies logical explanation, the disciples knew exactly who they were. It was Moses, the great lawgiver who had met God in the burning bush and on the heights of Sinai. And it was Elijah, the fiery prophet, who had called down fire from heaven on Mount Carmel and was taken up in a whirlwind. These were the two pillars of the Old Covenant, the law and the prophets, the entire weight of Israel's history and hope, now standing on a mountain in Galilee. They were not ghosts or ethereal spirits. They appeared solid, real, and glorious, engaged in a conversation of ultimate importance. Think about the significance of this. Moses, whose own face had shone with a reflected glory after being in God's presence, was now beholding the source of that glory. Elijah, who had experienced the despair of feeling he was the last one left, was now standing with the very fulfillment of all he had prophesied. They were not there as mere historical figures, but as living witnesses. Their presence served as a divine endorsement, a heavenly confirmation that this Jesus, the carpenter from Nazareth, was the one to whom the law and the prophets had pointed all along. He was the culmination of every promise, the answer to every prophecy, the living embodiment of the word that Moses had received and Elijah had proclaimed. They were not specters from the past. They were active participants in this revelation, bridging the gap between the old covenant and the new one that was being established in Jesus' own blood. And what were they speaking of? The scriptures tell us they spoke of his departure, his exodus asterisk in the Greek, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. This is a word freighted with meaning. They were not just talking about his death, they were speaking of his new exodus. Moses had led the first Exodus, liberating God's people from physical slavery in Egypt. Now he stood with Jesus, discussing the ultimate Exodus, the one that would liberate all of humanity from the slavery of sin and death. This glory on the mountaintop was not the destination. It was a preparation. It was the strengthening of the Son of Man for the agony that awaited him. The conversation was not about avoiding the cross, but about fulfilling it. The path to the resurrection, the path to ultimate glory, led directly through the suffering of Jerusalem. The glory the disciples were witnessing was the very glory Jesus was choosing to lay aside, in order to embrace the shame of the cross for the sake of love. In the midst of this terrifying and beautiful scene, it is Peter who breaks the sacred silence. Overwhelmed, disoriented, and likely terrified out of his mind, he says what must have seemed like a good idea at the time, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." The scripture is quick to add that he did not know what he was saying. This is a profoundly human moment. In the face of incomprehensible glory, Peter's first instinct is to build something, to domesticate the divine, to contain the experience within a manageable human structure. He wants to prolong the moment, to set up camp on the mountain of glory and stay there forever. Who could blame him? He saw a glimpse of heaven and wanted to make it a permanent residence. But his suggestion, born of fear and awe, misses the point entirely. He puts Jesus on the same level as Moses and Elijah, offering them equal honor, equal shelter. He fails to see that Moses and Elijah are there to bear witness to Jesus, not to be his equals. They are the supporting cast. Jesus is the central figure. Furthermore, Peter seeks to build a shrine to a transient moment of glory, not understanding that this glory was not meant to be contained in a tent on a hill. It was meant to be carried down the mountain and into the world, through the valley of the shadow of death, and ultimately revealed to all nations through the power of the resurrection. Peter wanted to cling to the vision, but the purpose of the vision was to strengthen them for the mission that lay ahead. He wanted to preserve the experience, but the experience was meant to transform the man. And just as Peter attempts to fossilize this moment of transformation into a monument, God himself intervenes. Before the first stone of Peter's misguided shrine could be laid, a cloud appears and envelops them. This was no ordinary mountain cloud. In the language of the scriptures, the cloud is the very chariot of God, the visible sign of his invisible presence, the Shekinah glory that once filled the tabernacle and the temple. It is both a revealing and a concealing. It reveals that the holy God is present, but it conceals his fullness, lest they be utterly consumed. This is the cloud that guided Israel through the desert, the cloud from which God spoke to Moses on Sinai. Its arrival here signifies that this is a moment of divine revelation, on par with the giving of the law. It is a moment of holy terror. The disciples are no longer just spectators of a glorious vision. They are now participants in a divine encounter. And from within this terrifying, glorious cloud, a voice speaks. It is not the voice of Moses the lawgiver. It is not the voice of Elijah the prophet. It is the voice of God the Father, and it thunders with the authority of heaven itself. The voice doesn't engage in a discussion with Peter. It doesn't gently correct his architectural plans. It bypasses him completely and issues a definitive, world-altering declaration. "This is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." Let's break that down, because every word is saturated with meaning. First, "This is my Son." This statement demolishes Peter's well-intentioned but flawed attempt at equalization. Jesus is not one of 3 great spiritual leaders. He is in a category all by himself. Moses was a servant in God's house. Jesus is the son over the house. Elijah was a mighty prophet who spoke for God. Jesus is the very word of God made flesh. The Father himself clarifies the hierarchy. There is no comparison. Then, "Whom I love," or as some translations put it, "my beloved Son." This is a voice of infinite paternal affection. It echoes the words spoken at Jesus' baptism, reaffirming his unique identity and his perfect relationship with the Father. This is not just a statement of fact. It's a declaration of love. In the midst of this overwhelming power and glory, the core of the revelation is a relationship of love between the Father and the Son. This is the engine of the universe. The love that existed before time began, now made audible on a mountaintop. And finally, the command, "Listen to him." This is the practical application of the entire event. If this is God's beloved Son, the one who perfectly pleases the Father, then his words carry ultimate authority. The command is absolute and unqualified. It doesn't say listen to him when it's convenient or listen to him when you agree with him. It says listen to him, period. This command is directed squarely at Peter, James, and John. They had just heard Jesus speak of his impending suffering, rejection, and death in Jerusalem. They didn't understand it. They didn't want to hear it. Peter had even rebuked Jesus for it. Now, the Father himself validates the Son's difficult message. The voice from heaven essentially says, "That talk of the cross you didn't want to hear, that is the path. That is my will. Stop trying to build shelters to escape the reality of the mission. Stop arguing. Listen to him." The era of the law and the prophets, represented by Moses and Elijah, is now fulfilled and superseded by the voice of the Son. The final and ultimate word from God to humanity is Jesus. The effect of this divine pronouncement on the disciples is immediate and profound. The text says they fell face down to the ground, terrified. This is the appropriate response. Confronted with the unmediated voice of God, all human bravado evaporates. Peter's impulse to build, to speak, to do something, is silenced. All that is left is awe and terror. They are flattened by the weight of God's glory. This is not the cozy, comfortable, manageable God that Peter wanted to build a tent for. This is the Holy One of Israel, the creator of the cosmos, and his presence is overwhelming. Their prostration on the ground is an act of involuntary worship. It is the creature falling down before the Creator, the sinner shrinking before the Holy. They finally understand, not with their intellects but with their entire beings, that they are on holy ground. And in that moment of absolute terror, something remarkable happens. The story doesn't end with them flattened on the ground in fear, paralyzed by a glory they cannot possibly contain. The bridge between the terrifying holiness of the Father and the fragile humanity of the disciples is the Son himself. The text says, "But Jesus came and touched them." Think about the significance of that. He doesn't call out from a distance. He doesn't wait for them to compose themselves. He closes the gap. He, the one who is just shining with the inaccessible light of the Godhead, comes to them in their prostrate terror and makes physical contact. This is the gospel in miniature. This is the logic of the incarnation played out on a mountaintop. The God whose voice shakes the foundations of the world is the same God who has a human hand to place on a frightened shoulder. The touch grounds them. It is a conduit of peace, a tangible reassurance that they are not going to be consumed. It's the same hand that would later be pierced with nails, the same hand that touched lepers and healed the blind. His glorified state has not made him distant. It has revealed the full truth of who he is, and that truth includes this profound, compassionate intimacy. He is both the overwhelming Lord and the gentle shepherd. He is the one who reveals the terrifying glory of the Father, and he is the one who shields us from it and makes it bearable. And what are the first words he speaks after this ultimate divine endorsement? Rise and have no fear. It is a command, but it is also a grace. Rise, get up. You were knocked down by the weight of glory, but I am here to lift you. This is a kind of mini-resurrection. They were, in the ancient turn of phrase, like dead men, and he bids them to stand up and live. And then, have no fear. This is perhaps the most common divine imperative in all of Scripture. It's what the angels say to the shepherds. It's what Jesus says to his disciples on the stormy sea. It's what the risen Christ says to the women at the tomb. Why? Because fear is the natural human reaction to the divine, but it is the enemy of faith and relationship. Fear sees God and wants to run and hide. Faith sees God, and through Christ, is able to draw near. Jesus' touch and his words are an antidote to the paralyzing fear, an invitation to move from terror to trust. And when they are finally able to lift their heads, having been reassured by his touch and his voice, the scene has changed once again. They look up, and the Gospel of Matthew says they saw no one except Jesus alone. The vision is over. The cloud has lifted. The uncreated light has subsided. Moses and Elijah are gone. All the props of the supernatural spectacle have been cleared from the stage. The supporting actors have taken their bow and departed. And who remains standing in the center? Jesus. Only Jesus. This is the ultimate takeaway. This is the visual summary of the Father's command. Listen to him! And now, there is no one else to listen to. The law, in the person of Moses, has borne its witness and receded. The prophets, in the person of Elijah, have given their testimony and fallen silent. Their roles were magnificent and God-ordained, but they were preparatory. They were the signposts pointing down the road, but Jesus is the destination. They were the servants who prepared the house for the arrival of the Son. Now that the Son is here, in all his glory, the servants respectfully step aside. This moment radically reorients the disciples' spiritual universe. They can no longer see Jesus as simply the next in a long line of prophets, or even as a new and greater Moses. He is in a category all by himself. The law is good. The prophets are essential, but they are the moon that reflects the light. Jesus is the sun. The entire event on the mountain was designed to strip away every other competing voice, every other loyalty, every other frame of reference, until all that was left for them to focus on was Jesus alone. Their discipleship has just been given its ultimate singular focus. The age of shadows and types is over. The age of the Son, the Beloved, has fully dawned, and his is the only voice that now matters. This is the clarity they must carry with them as they prepare to walk back down the mountain. And that descent is just as spiritually significant as the ascent. It's one thing to have a moment of stunning, supernatural clarity on the peak, isolated from the world. It's another thing entirely to carry that clarity back into the noise, the confusion, and the suffering of the valley below. The mountaintop experience isn't meant to be a permanent escape. It's meant to be fuel for the mission that awaits at the bottom. The vision of Jesus alone is not a call to monastic isolation, but a radical recentering for engagement with a broken world. Think about what this means practically. Up until this point, the disciples have been trying to fit Jesus into pre-existing categories. Is he Elijah returned? Is he the prophet Jeremiah? Is he a new Moses? A lawgiver who will restore Israel's fortunes? They are operating with an old map. The transfiguration gives them a new map. And at the center of this new map, there is only Jesus. From now on, they are to understand Moses through Jesus. They are to understand Elijah through Jesus. The entire history of their people, the law that shaped their society, the prophetic promises that gave them hope. All of it now finds its true north in him. He is not just another character in the story of Israel. He oases the story. He is the lens through which everything else must now be viewed. This is a profound shift. It means the law is no longer just a set of rules to be followed, but a signpost that pointed to the grace and truth that would arrive in the person of Christ. It means the prophets are no longer just voices from the past, but a great chorus whose 1,000 different melodies all resolve into the single perfect note of the Son. Seeing Jesus alone doesn't mean discarding the Old Testament. It means finally being able to read it correctly. He is the key that unlocks its true meaning. Without him, it's a collection of laws, histories, and poems. With him, it becomes a unified testament to his identity and mission. And as they begin their descent, Jesus gives them a puzzling command. He tells them, "Tell the vision to no one until the Son of Man is raised from the dead." Why the secrecy? If this is the central truth of the universe, why keep it under wraps? Because a half-truth can be more dangerous than a lie. The vision of glory, on its own, is incomplete. If the disciples went down the mountain and announced, "We've seen him shining like the sun," he is the glorious one, talking with Moses and Elijah, they would have started a revolution, but the wrong kind of revolution. People would have tried to make him a political king, a military messiah, who would use his divine power to overthrow Rome. They would have grasped for the crown without understanding the cross. Jesus knows that the glory on the mountain can only be properly understood in the light of the sacrifice on the hill of Calvary. The path to the final resurrected glory runs directly through betrayal, suffering, and death. The transfiguration is not a detour around the passion. It is a preview of its ultimate outcome. It's a promise whispered to the inner circle, a deposit of hope given to them so that when they see him arrested, beaten, and crucified, they might have some anchor, some memory of his true identity to hold on to in the storm of their fear and doubt. He is showing them the end of the story, so they might have the strength to endure the middle of it. The glory must be held in tension with the suffering. They are two sides of the same divine reality. This command to silence forces them to wrestle with this paradox internally. They can't just broadcast the vision. They have to integrate it. They have to sit with the dizzying contradiction of a glorious son who speaks of being rejected and killed. This is the hard work of discipleship. It's not about chasing one spiritual high after another. It's about letting the truth of the mountaintop reshape your understanding of the grit and grime of the valley. It's about learning to see the Son of God not just when he shines like the sun, but when he is sweating blood in the garden, when he is crowned with thorns, when he is crying out in abandonment. The vision of Jesus alone must become so deeply embedded in their hearts that they can still see him, truly see him, even when the glory is completely hidden beneath human weakness and agony. That is the faith they will need, and that is the faith this moment was designed to begin building within them. And as they walk down that path, stumbling over rocks, their minds are reeling. The Gospel of Mark tells us they, quote, kept the matter to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead might mean. Think about that. They have just witnessed the single most glorious confirmation of Jesus' identity imaginable, and what are they stuck on? The part they don't understand. The part that involves suffering. This is so profoundly human. We can be standing in a room ablaze with light, but our eyes will fixate on the one dark corner we can't figure out. They have the ultimate answer. Jesus is the glorious Son of God. But they are hung up on a new question. This shows us that faith isn't about having a complete tidy theological system with no loose ends. It's about being willing to follow the one who holds the answers, even when you can't yet grasp them. Their confusion is a form of engagement. They are wrestling, and wrestling is the posture of anyone who takes God seriously. The command from the cloud becomes their lifeline in this confusion. Listen to him. The Father doesn't say, understand everything he says immediately. He says, listen to him. Trust the speaker, even when the words are difficult. This is the shift that the transfiguration is meant to cause. For centuries, the people of God had listened to the law, represented by Moses, and the prophets, represented by Elijah. These were the two great pillars of their faith, the guiding voices of their history. And on that mountain, both of those pillars appear, not to add their own teaching, but to bear witness to someone greater. They are the esteemed honor guard for the king. They speak with him, but then they fade away. The cloud lifts and the disciples see no one but Jesus alone. The message could not be clearer. The law and the prophets have done their work. They have pointed the way to the Messiah. Now their voices are subsumed into his. From this point forward, the law must be read through the lens of Jesus. The prophets must be understood in the light of Jesus. He is the interpretive key to everything that came before. Listen to him is the new central commandment. This moment on the mountain is, in a way, a gift for us as much as it was for Peter, James, and John. We all have mountaintop experiences, moments of profound clarity and spiritual intimacy. A moment in prayer where everything just clicks. A time of worship where God's presence feels almost tangible. A passage of scripture that seems to leap off the page and burn itself into your heart. These moments are real, and they are vital. They are glimpses of the glory that is our ultimate destination. But we don't live on the mountain. We can't build shelters there and stay forever, as Peter wanted to. The purpose of the mountaintop is to equip us for the valley. It's to give us a memory of the light that we can carry back down into the shadows. Because the moment they get to the bottom of that mountain, reality hits them like a physical blow. They don't come down to a welcoming party, they come down to chaos. They find the other 9 disciples surrounded by a crowd, arguing with the scribes. And at the center of this frantic scene is a father in utter desperation, holding his son, who is tormented by a demon, a spirit that has stolen his voice and seeks to destroy him. The disciples who were left behind were powerless to help. They had the authority from Jesus, but in this moment their faith was too small, their connection to the source of power too weak. They were failing. Here is the grit and grime of the world in its rawest form. A suffering child, a desperate parent, a hostile and mocking crowd, and the impotence of well-intentioned but faltering faith. The contrast is breathtaking. From the serene, divine glory of the summit to the demonic, human chaos of the valley in just a few steps. This isn't an accident in the narrative. It is the whole point. The vision of Jesus in his glory is not given, so that we can escape the mess of the world. It is given so that we have the strength and the perspective to engage it. Jesus doesn't float down from the mountain and recoil from the scene. He walks right into the heart of it. The glory he possesses is not a fragile treasure to be protected. It is a conquering power to be deployed. He has just been confirmed by the Father, flanked by the greatest figures of Israel's history, and now he will demonstrate what that divine authority actually looks like when it confronts the brokenness of our world. So the glory on the mountain is the fuel for the mission in the valley. It's the memory of the light we're called to carry into the world's darkest corners. My question for you today is this: what does it look like for you to carry the light from your own mountaintop experiences down into the very real chaos of your daily life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And if this resonated with you, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell, because you won't want to miss our next video, where we'll see exactly how Jesus deploys his glory in the face of this brokenness. Stay strong in the valley. This is Marco.